Another mass shooting, another school shooting, another sense of deja vu. 6 people, 3 teachers and 3 9-year-olds were killed at the Christian Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee by Audrey Elizabeth Hale, a 28-year-old former student. Authorities are saying the attack was targeted, but details are still sparse. However, police have said that Hale, who was killed on the scene, was transgender and told police that they resented going to the Christian school. In a society split by both gun reform and culture wars, especially regarding trans rights and the role of religion in politics, this attack is already being politicized from all angles. But should tragedies like this be politicized in this manner, and is the gender of the shooter relevant? By defining a mass shooting as a single outburst of violence in which 4 or more people are shot, this was the 150th mass shooting in the US in 2023. But with politicians reluctant to accept changes to gun laws, including Tennessee's representative Andy Ogles, who posted this photo of his family last Christmas, will anything be done? What's more important to the United States, the Second Amendment or human lives? How can the US stop mass shootings?
So let's get to it, gentlemen. How can the U.S. stop mass shootings? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to allow your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick it up from there. So, Mr. Rob Pincus, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Yeah, I think what's important to understand is that yesterday a spree killing was stopped. It was stopped by effective and efficient response from local law enforcement, and the casualties involved were probably reduced pretty dramatically by the procedures that the school had in place. If we're asking, obviously, the bigger question, can they be stopped? Can they be eradicated? I think the answer is no. Violence exists. Evil exists. There always will be that evil. Obviously, we want to take all the steps we can to reduce violence like this, reduce killings of any kind involving firearms or not. As someone involved in the gun industry, I'm very interested in ending those as well.
Yes, then that's perhaps a mutual goal for all those across the political aisle. Ron Kampeas, your thoughts?
Well, what this triggered, I think, was a consideration of what can happen next. Last year, John Cornyn, a Republican senator from Texas, which is a very much a Second Amendment state, managed to spearhead some modest changes through Congress that were signed, including closing a loop for domestic violence cases and also slightly expanding background checks. The thing is now, what we're going to watch now is whether there is the political capital to go further than that.
Yeah, Marc Schulman, your take.
I think unlikely. The very fact that a gentleman here is a Second Amendment organization, and that's become the center point of too many politicians and too much of the culture war. I don't think we can do anything to stop it. There are too many guns in America. We can't take them away. We can't convince anyone that they don't need an assault rifle. Let's keep in mind that this shooter supposedly bought 7 separate assault rifles and other guns before she did the shooting. So how one person shouldn't be entitled to buy 7 guns is beyond my understanding.
Okay, gentlemen, and on that note, let's please feel free to interact. Can anything or any event really change public opinion on gun laws, or is the debate frozen forever to an extent? Mr. Kampeas, take the lead, please.
Yeah, I don't, it's interesting. I was living in Britain when they had that massacre of kindergarteners in Scotland. That put an end to whatever liberal aspects there were to gun laws in Scotland, in Britain at the time. And then you had a similar situation here where the victims were 6-year-olds in 2012 in Connecticut, and the efforts by advocates after that, although they led to the establishment of actually gun control groups, they didn't change the laws. So I think that the fact that you can have incidents in countries like Britain and Australia that can turn around gun laws, I don't think that there's a capacity for that in the United States because of its traditions, because of its cultures. But I'd like to hear more from the others on why that is.
I think that, look, I first had made an argument that the tradition had to do with the West and the gun culture of the West and everything. But then I was corrected by a right-wing radio host that I appear on every week and said, no, it's about the fact that we have the Second Amendment, that we could revolt and fight against the government. That's why we need AR-15s. We need to be there to fight against the government at any given moment. And I think that's part of the problem. We've gone from, defense, having a pistol at home to defend ourselves, to we all have to have AR-15s to do whatever we might need to do. And that's just been an absurd situation. And the pushing and the fact that why in the world anyone at home needs an AR-15 is beyond my understanding. Why they need an assault rifle, it makes no sense. You need hunting rifles, you need pistols to defend yourself, a shotgun. But you don't need it. And I'm saying this, and I know nothing's going to change, because the people who believe in this so strongly. The Second Amendment has become the Bible of part of the American public, more important than any other amendment to the Constitution. And I think that it's a tragedy, but I don't see any solution.
Well, no better man to chime in than Rob Pincus here.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to address there. One, the idea that it's now gone to the idea that we are here to defend ourselves and our way of life, potentially from our own government or an outside government, an outside force, that's fundamentally inherent to the Second Amendment. In fact, the evolution in the interpretation and the codifying of the Second Amendment as an individual right, that's an extension of an internationally recognized point of law, which is the right to self-preservation, the right to self-defense, and then thereby the means to that self-defense. That's actually a rather modern codification. And the fact that the Supreme Court over the last 50 years has repeatedly reaffirmed that this is 100% an individual right is a relatively
right to have a pistol, not to have an assault rifle. There is no reason for an assault rifle. I'm sorry. You don't need an assault rifle to defend your home.
Opinions vary on that. What's important is to define what that means, probably. I have a couple different firearms up behind me. Functionally, the rather innocent-looking one that's wood here, and this one that looks maybe more nefarious, function exactly the same way. And many people's definition of an auto-loading rifle, a rifle that can be uses external magazines, well, both of those rifles meet that definition. So throwing out terms like assault rifle, I know there's a lot of emotion attached to that. The reality is that a semi-automatic rifle, whether it's in the hands of a responsible person or the hands of someone who wants to kill, the problem is the person. The problem isn't the rifle. The problem isn't the pistol. The problem isn't the fact
why are there so many more Americans? Why are there so many more Americans killing other Americans than there are Brits, French people, German people, Chinese people, Japanese people, you name it? Only in America, where the gun laws are so forgiving, shall we say, or there are no gun laws in many cases, do so many people kill other people?
I am not sure how familiar you are with the United States or with our gun laws. There are thousands of gun laws on the books. I'm a manufacturer of firearms. I sell firearms. I have to sell them only to people who have other licenses. As a manufacturer, those people have to conduct background checks when they sell the guns at retail. There are a handful of states where private transfers are still thankfully legal, where the government doesn't get involved in our transfers of property as responsible citizens who own the firearms. However, to say that there's no gun laws it's facetious.
Okay, you're right. There are gun laws, but the fact of the matter is, almost everybody in the United States can get a gun if he wants it. Period. It's almost impossible. As
it's constitutionally protected. I mean, it's a constitutionally protected right. To say that it's not a civil right.
Look, I'm not arguing that we can stop it. I don't believe we can stop you at all. I don't believe that there's any way to stop manufacturers from pushing not you personally, but your views cannot be changed at this point. There's no way. There's no political means of doing it at this point. Okay. That doesn't mean it's good.
So then,
doesn't mean it's right.
If you're resigned to that, that's great. Let's talk about what we can do, and that's proactive mental health care. We can have a more active gun community that is policing one another. We can have things like the Pledge of Responsible Ownership codified and normalized across the gun-owning spectrum, and we can do more proactive intervention at the schools, in our communities, and especially in our families.
How about fingerprint lock on guns? To me is when did why and when did in the United States did armed defense transition from being a collective matter to an individual matter? Because I lived in Israel for a long time. It's a gun-heavy society, but the guns are distributed by the government. And if you use your gun for anything other than national security, for defense, you can pull out your pistol and shoot a terrorist in the street who's attacking a bus, and nobody's going to fault you. You're going to be the hero of the day. But if you use that in any kind of personal interaction, even if there's a defense for it in Israel, you're going to go to jail because you are using this outside the hierarchy of how guns are supposed to be used. And that's the education, that's the culture in Israel. And I think that's true of other countries. I think it's true of Switzerland as well, where every reserves age person has a gun in their house kept under lock and key. It's considered to be necessary for the collective defense, not the individual defense. So what happened in the United States? I'm interested that made this individual.
I don't know
Supreme Court in a series of rulings. A Supreme Court in a series of rulings over the conservative Supreme Court changed that from a collective view to a personal view. That is absolutely the fact. It's a law of the land. Supreme Court made it more difficult to regulate guns by a series of rulings. It's gotten worse and worse in that sense over the last 20 years as the court has moved steadily to the right, and they've accepted. They've taken the Second Amendment to the extreme point. That's the reality. That's the reality we have to live with.
Sir,
whether it's worse or worse.
No, please, Rob Pincus. Mark, let's allow Rob to chime in, please.
Yeah, it's a matter of opinion whether it's better or worse. Obviously, if freedom comes with risk, and that risk needs to be met with responsibilities. And I think the vast majority, clearly, of firearms owners, you may say it's gotten worse and worse because there's more and more guns and more gun owners in the U.S., or the Supreme Court has reaffirmed this as an individual right. It has been a matter of contention in the past. That issue has been settled, thankfully, by the Supreme Court long before it turned into an overwhelmingly right-leaning court, which has happened relatively recently. Again, this has been going on for decades. The restrictions on our gun rights, individual gun rights, especially at the state level, are in direct opposition to what we all perceive as the intentions of our founding fathers, including the Supreme Court. We have a constitutional civil right to the means to self-defense, and that does extend to the defense of our country and the defense of our way of life. But individual rights, sir, when you said that in Israel, one's going to jail if they use a gun for personal protection, I've heard anecdotally, it's anecdotal as all it is, but I've heard anecdotally about people using guns to defend themselves. I teach in Switzerland every year since 2006. I'm over there quite a bit. I'm very familiar with their gun culture, and quite a number of people carry guns for personal defense there, in addition to their government-issued firearms.
Look, in Israel, soldiers used to take their guns home. Every soldier, when I was in the Army years ago, we took our guns home, regardless. They stopped doing that because the number of suicides and accidental deaths was so high that they stopped letting soldiers take the guns home except some very elite units. The result? Suicides went down and the number of accidental deaths went down. That's the reality. Guns are dangerous instruments and they kill. Now, that's something everyone's willing to accept in the United States. It seems that's the case. You look at gun ownership by state per capita, and the number of deaths per capita by guns, it's highest in those states that have the highest percentage of gun ownership. That's just a reality. And now I wish there was something could be done. I don't know whether you agree, for instance, to finger lock, in other words, only the owner of the gun can operate the gun. That could be done technologically, but it seems there's an opposition to that. There are other small things that could be done, but you don't want to limit any sort of rights, and I think that's a shame.
Okay, gentlemen, now we do need to put a stop right here, but hold your thoughts right there, because after the break we continue our discussion and perhaps focusing on the political context of it all, or perhaps even phrasing it better, how will it all be politically utilized, right? A few minutes break, and we're back with our summit. Do not go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Ron Kampeas, Rob Pincus, and Marc Schulman. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, nothing is happening in a void, of course, and in this polarized political climate, anything is connected to everything and vice versa. So let's take a listen to what Donald Trump Jr. had to say in the aftermath of the shooting and take it from there.
Given the incredible rise of trans non-binary mass shooters in the last few years, by far the largest group committing as a percentage of population, maybe, rather than talking about guns, we should be talking about lunatics pushing their gender-affirming bullshit on our kids.
Okay, gentlemen, another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Is the identity of the shooters relevant at all? Ron Kampeas, please take the lead.
I know that this has become an issue of confusion, because at first I think the police only identified her as a woman, and then mentioned that she was transgender, and that I think I saw a headline on the Fox News website identifying her as a transgender shooter. If I were as a reporter, if I were reporting on that, that would be, something I would put down in the fourth or the fifth graph. It's not something I would make a headline out of. I don't think that's necessarily germane to whether somebody opens fire on children or not.
Marc Schulman?
Look, it's quite clear that anyone who opens fire on children has psychological problems, whichever they may be. I mean, that's period. I mean, killers, generally speaking, an exception of people maybe an emotional, find your husband or wife in bed with somebody and you kill them, that might be someone who may be half normal. It also shouldn't be right, isn't right, obviously. But generally, people kill other people and do it, have real psychological problems. Any mass killer has psychological problems. Is this one caused by the fact she may or may not have been transgender? Well, maybe yes. But, again, that's not the issue. I mean, the issue is that this person had psychological problems. She was allowed to buy guns, by the way.
Yeah.
She had a lot of guns, and that's the question, not whether she was transgender or not.
Rob Pincus, your thoughts?
Well, Mr. Schulman and I agree on that for sure. I think that it's just as irrelevant what type of gun was used as it is what type of person used it. The fact is that it's someone who wanted to kill children, who had this anger, this angst, disturbed for sure. There are tens of millions of gun owners in the United States that don't kill people. There are hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of millions of people who don't identify in standard sexual or gender roles who also don't go out and kill people. Those issues aren't the relevant issues. As individuals, it does matter why people are driven to this.
And on that note, gentlemen, let's once again feel free to interact, but let's try to connect this to the greater political debate, if you will, or rather how it is going to be utilized politically. This shooting and the overall topic of gun control, as we are apparently already amidst election season. Every season is election season to an extent. Marc Schulman.
I mean, look, by and large, it's going to be kabuki theater. In other words,
God bless you.
excuse me, the Democrats will say we need more gun control. The Republicans say we can't have it, and no one will expect anything to happen as a result. That's the reality. I don't think it'll play a major role. I don't think it's it's a major issue that I think the American people have come to the conclusion is basically unsolvable. So I don't think it's really going to have a major impact on the political campaigns.
So neither side is trying to influence the other no more. Ron Kampeas, but should the Biden administration try to do more on that?
Well, no, there is a great deal of polarization. I imagine the Biden administration will once again try and expand red flag laws, flags for mental health problems, for any kind of previous actions that would signal that this person perhaps shouldn't own a gun. And that's what's kind of surprising about this. Not surprising, perhaps, but it's unsettling about this polarized atmosphere. It's actually a win-win. One side, whether the Republican or Democrat, can reach out to the other side and say, you know what, we're not agreeing on guns. But maybe we can talk about mental health, because the mental health in the United States, it's in a state of collapse. There's try and get somebody who needs therapy. They're overburdened therapists because of the pandemic and its after effects. There are no universal standards that help people who want to get mental health care find out whether something's appropriate for them or not. If that's something that maybe they could come together on, both sides keep on saying it's an issue, but they're not working together on it yet.
So, Rob Pincus, is this going to stay that way, as in there will not be any attempt to reach a consensus in that, a very basic general agreement on how the U.S. should tackle what the administration is dubbing an epidemic?
Well, I absolutely think there has been a consensus reached that mental health is the core of the issue. The suicide prevention, earlier we mentioned suicide being the vast majority of firearms-involved deaths in another country. Well, it's the same here in the U.S. And firearms-involved deaths affect the gun community more than anyone else. We are incredibly proactive. You guys talked about the technology of fingerprint activation to unlock this gun safe. Is something that I believe in, that I advocate for. Second Amendment organization, Personal Defense Network, everywhere that I speak on this, I advocate for preventing unauthorized access to guns. The simple fact is the technology isn't proven to work on the guns themselves in terms of like you see in the movies with a fingerprint on the gun itself. When it comes to proactive mental health care, we're on the rise. We absolutely were in decline for a long time. It was a neglected part of our culture. We have changed that largely in the gun community. And I think nationwide, we're seeing more and more action. Unfortunately, the polarization that exists is that people will take any opportunity, if their agenda is assault weapons ban, Every time something happens, it's going to be about the assault weapons ban. If it's about background checks, it's going to be about background checks. Those conversations go nowhere because of our guaranteed civil rights, because of the Supreme Court's reaffirmation of this as an individual right for self-preservation, as well as our country's and way of life's preservation. Those conversations will go nowhere. And quite frankly, they suck a lot of the oxygen out of the room. But there are many of us in the gun community who are working proactively. I hold up the organization Walk the Talk America, which works at the intersection of mental health and guns to reduce negative outcomes. I'm on the board of that organization, proud to serve with them. They're just one example of many, many proactive things that are done every day by responsible gun owners to prevent more tragedies from happening.
And Marc Schulman, I'm trying to connect the dots here, and maybe it's an overreach. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we can see a clear Republican focus on issues that has to do with schools. Let it be the Don't Say Gay legislation, the parental rights on education content, and of course the longstanding debate of whether schools should become fortresses to an extent or be armed. Are schools becoming the most prevalent political arena, so to speak?
They've become a major political arena. Obviously, in the post-COVID period of time, when, number one, the major issue, should schools have remained open or closed, that became a major issue. The Republicans have been looking for agenda items in their social fight, so to speak. In other words, they're not fight. They can't talk about the economy. They really can't talk about Ukraine. So they're looking for social issues that divide Americans. So school is a good place. It's a good place to talk about transgender issues that have become such a central point, in which I don't understand how it became such a central point. And so transgender in schools, all these things have become a good place to fight the cultural wars. And Republicans tend to do well with cultural wars. So they're using the school as a place to jump off in terms of the cultural wars. And there's no question it's been somewhat successful for them. Look, most people have kids in school or grandkids in school. So everyone's sort of concerned about school. And of course, the answer is, what's the best solution? And no one has really found that, unfortunately.
Ron Kampeas, in the short time we have left, wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that schools have definitely become a cultural battleground. The Republicans seized on a moment with the pandemic when people were being kept out of schools, and a lot of parents across the spectrum were frustrated. I think that's receding now. I think that you're seeing, particularly here in Virginia, a greater sympathy for teachers who are overloaded because the schools are losing teachers, and so I think you're going to see a little bit of a correction towards the schools now, and it might not be as potent an issue going forward for Republicans, but they justifiably, they seized a political moment, and it was there, and it has extended to the whole issue of gun use. Yeah.